So what was your next deployment after that one with the RLI guys?
I think the interesting one would be for your audience in that we had a lemon trip. We were rushed up to the northeast border to Nyamapanda, and we took two troops up there and we put them on one side of the main tar road. I think it was a tar road, on one troop on one side of the road, one troop of the other. And our briefing was that there was a squadron of T-34 Russian tanks who were going to come across the border. And this was the one and only time that I had to prepare the gun for direct line of sight fire. And what that meant was actually putting a gun telescope into the shield of the gun and sight the gun on a direct line of sight basis.
Basically turning it into an anti-tank gun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we were ready with what we called supercharged HE rounds, which were high velocity rounds for armor piercing. But that was a scary prospect. But fortunately, as I say, the trip was a lemon and nothing ever happened. So I think for your audiences, that was quite an interesting experience for us.
Yeah, you must be on sort of tenterhooks. For our foreign viewers, an operation that's called a lemon is obviously a lemon is sour. You go somewhere and it doesn't happen. It's a non-event, so we call them op lemons. But yes,
Yes, and also Nyamapanda is sort of the northeast part of the country of Rhodesia.
I'm fascinated to know that you actually had armor-piercing rounds for artillery.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how effective they would have been. Honestly, yeah, the thought of trying to take on a Russian T-34 tank with Second World War ordnance, I don't know if we would have won that fight. To be honest, I don't know. And I know that in the Second World War they were used for anti tank firing, but
Yeah,
I don't know how effective we would have been against a squadron of T-34 tanks. To be honest.
from my studies of Second World War events, is particularly the German anti-tank guns, they would always fire from the side if they could. They'd ambush them from the side,
Yes.
because the front sloping armor of a T-34 is very effective. So I don't know what that was a 25-pounder you're using. Hey,
Yeah.
it probably, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but it probably would have bounced off. So that's when you know how strong your gopher muscles are, and maybe in that instance you'd aim for the top of the tank rather than the bit at the
Yeah.
front.
Or the tracks maybe to disable it.
Yes, yes.
I don't think we would be able to blow them up, but thankfully we never had to engage.
That yeah, that's something I guess where if you had time you could have put some landmines out in a forward protective screen, but you don't often have the opportunity to do that, do you?
No, no. Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying to run through. We did just to give a little bit of variety. I spent a lot of time at Victoria Falls,
Very good.
National Service and Territorial Army call-ups. So I did 18 months of national service and 6 camps. And if my memory serves me right, I did 3 camps in Umtali at Impala Arms, and I did 3 camps in Victoria Falls. Um, the one interesting event that happened there in terms of military action was that we had two there were 2 camps that we had there. One was just past you had to take the Kazangula turnoff, and we were about 2 or 3 kilometers down the road behind Victoria Falls. And then we had the other camp that I went to was just off the Victoria Falls Airport runway.
Yes.
And they were both permanent camps. They weren't temporary camps, and they had to be cut from virgin bush. But the one incident that I had was leading up to the 1980 elections, and I cannot remember if it was an extended call up, but I do remember being there on my 21st birthday, and I'm not sure if I went back home and came back out again, or whether I was in the army or on that camp for the whole period of time leading up to and after the elections. But when we first got there, we had a call out, and there was some CTs that were being chased behind Victoria Falls in one of the TTLs. And this is quite an interesting fire mission, because I think we only had 2 guns, and we were driving all over on these this TTL on these dust roads. And there was it was a K car and a spotter plane were flying around all over the place, and we actually saw the K car engage. And about a few minutes later, we had to suddenly stop the trucks and put these 2 guns into action. And we were on the road, and we didn't have time to put sighting poles up or anything like that. Literally, they were shouting the coordinates as we were. So I was actually on the gun when they were putting the gun on the platform and rotating it, trying to get my dial sight ready, unlock the barrel, all those kind of things. The guys were getting the ammo ready. And we had to do like a seek and search pattern of firing, because the targets were on the move. And if I remember correctly, the fire mission was 8 rounds, but it was a search fire mission where we were trying to put rounds into these CTs to disrupt them, break them up, move them out, so the special forces guys, whoever the infantry were, could actually go out and find them and remove them. So that was also a very interesting, probably what was the only other action that I had during my military service, and that was a TA call up sometime before the Mugabe election. I don't know how it was connected, because we weren't told much, and it was very quick. You would be in camp one day, and all of a sudden you were told, get up and go, and you had to just jump straight onto the trucks, and you were gone. So I didn't know much about the operation and what it was for, and where these guys had come from. But I think that's quite an interesting story. And then, of course, we had the election, and we had to move gun positions, and we were moved into a temporary gun position, also behind Victoria Falls. But this was also on very uneven ground, and it was terrible trying to sleep there, because the ground was hard. We couldn't dig bunkers, and we were only there for about 2 weeks during the elections. The interesting thing about that trip, Tony, was that before we left depot, Colonel Robin Brown gave us a briefing from Combined Ops, and the general message was that if Mugabe got into power, that special forces would take over the country. And we were under the impression that if that did happen, that everybody would be fine. But we were on our gun position, and we were listening to the radio, Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation, and we had heard that Mugabe had won. Strangely, we also knew that some of the polling stations around our area, they hadn't counted all the votes, so God knows what was going on behind the scenes. But I was a young unmarried bachelor, and I suppose I was a bit worried about my parents, who still lived in Bulawayo. But I remember there were guys there, wives, married, had kids, and they were really distressed and concerned about what was going on. And we were there for about a week after the election results had been announced. And then we were given orders to go back to decamp and go back to artillery HQ at Cranbourne. So we picked up the guns, and we moved in convoy back to Bulawayo, and we were at Det Junction, and we were stopped there. I'm not sure if we were refueling or what, but an amazing thing happened in that there was a 2.5 Merc full of Zipra cadres singing Chimaranga songs, shaking their AKs in the air, and showing us victory salutes. And I had an MAG belted up on the back of this 4.5, and I could do nothing. And I remember that had a massive impression on me when I was there. And we got back to Llewellyn. We overnighted at Llewellyn, and everybody was asking questions: what's going on? What's happening? And the next day we left Llewellyn. We got back to Cranbourne very late at night. And as we arrived, there were all these brown jobs, SADF guys running around, removing the 5.5s and these massive 6-wheeler gun tractors that the South Africans had lent us. And in fact, all those 5.5 howitzers belonged to South Africa. And we went to these guys and said, what are you doing? He said, oh, we're just taking our kit back to South Africa. And then we heard rumors that Special Forces guys had disbanded. So there was a lot of panic going on there. Guys didn't know, and they wanted to find out what was going on with their families and whatever. So it's a very insecure time for, I suppose, for a lot of guys in the services at that time, when Robert Mugabe had won the election. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of feelings of insecurity in that. So I distinctly remember that, and I think that made up my mind to actually leave Rhodesia. And it was only a few months later that, in fact, I left the country and spent a year in the United Kingdom.
It was a terrible time. It was very unsettling. I remember I'd left the army and become an instructor with Part 2 at Morris Depot, and I was driving home one evening with my wife. We lived in Mabelrain, and the road going out there, I forget the road that she took, but anyway, it was just swamped with all these guys with placards, and they were all waving and cheering, and I didn't have a weapon with me. I was in uniform, so I was a visual target, and they all banged on the car, and my wife was getting jittery, and it was terrible, absolutely terrible time.
Yeah, I think it's important that we sort of recognize that insecurity. I mean, we didn't even, that was my last Territorial Army camp. There was no standing down, or it was just bye, we'll see you, and that was the last camp I ever did. And as I say, I went to the UK, and I only came back to Zimbabwe about 2 years later.
Mm-hmm. I don't even remember handing my kit in. It just ended. It was just, I honestly have no memory of that whatsoever.
Yes.
But going back a little bit, were you or any of your friends involved at Vick Falls when that big crossing came in '79, where they attempted to invade the country? And
No.
I was in charge of a mortar platoon up there, and I listened to artillery firing over into Zambia. It was I loved that sound, like in the movies, and all the big explosions in Zambia. If you can go through the list of artillery guys I'd love to speak to one of the guys that was actually there that night. It was quite
Tony, I don't know who was there, because I was territorial then, and what they tended to do in artillery was they kept you in the same troops during your TA camps. And it was great, because they tried to keep you going to the same camps. As I said, I spent 3 at Impala Arms and 3 in Victoria Falls, all permanent gun positions. And it was usually with the same troop of guys, which was great, because a lot of the guys I did national service with me joined me on the TA camps. And then I met a lot of the other TA guys and the artillery guys they're a really good bunch of people. It was a fantastic unit to belong to. But I don't recall ever coming across anybody that was actually on the gun position when that Victoria Falls episode happened. I have heard about it. I've seen your YouTube clip on how it happened. I've also seen John Bolter describe what happened, but unfortunately, I wasn't there, and I don't know who was there, to be honest.
Mm. Yeah, well, that was the end of our lot. And so you left. You came back a couple of years later just for a visit, did you?
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult times in the UK then. It was difficult to get work, and I came back and got work in Bulawayo. And then I met my wife, and that was her history. We stayed in Zimbabwe for up until 1990, and then we left Zim to go to Namibia. I was in Namibia for 7.5 years, and down to Cape Town. Then we moved to Isle of Man, and then moved from Isle of Man to Malta, then Malta back to Isle of Man, and Isle of Man to BVI, British Virgin Islands, and back to Isle of Man. So it's been quite a lot of moving around over the years. But we're all back in the Isle of Man now, my whole family and I, and it's great. It's a great place to live.
I've only lived in 3 places my entire life. When I walk in the front door, my motto is I'm not leaving here unless it's in a body bag. But so I've been in this place ever since I came to England 22 years ago. But before we close our talk, you mentioned you had a horrific patrol in the Hondi Valley. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, the only time that I ever had an infantry role, and I can't give you a timeline, unfortunately. I just honestly cannot remember when it was, but and I'm not sure who we were attached to, which regiment, but I was deployed at Hondi. We were a stick of 6 men, and we were all artillerymen. Strangely, or maybe not strangely, we had two FNMAG gunners in that stick, two big guys. I can't remember their names, but they were 157 intake guys. I was 156. And we had a radio operator with an A76, and we had this incompetent, useless British artillery sergeant with no counterinsurgency training as our stick commander. And this was a patrol from hell. We were deployed at night on top of the Hondi escarpment. I was the map reader for all my sins. And before in the briefing, before we left to go to get the drop, to go to the drop off, I could see that where they were going to drop us off, there were massive, very narrow contours. And essentially, we had to go down the escarpment to get into the Hondi Valley. And I recommended to the sergeant that it was too dangerous at night. We shouldn't travel down that night. This guy insisted we continue. So I tried to navigate my best down these narrow animal tracks into the valley. And I was stopping to check our position when this sergeant walked into my back. And his momentum carried him and I over a ledge. And we dropped about 6 feet through thick bush onto another ledge. And his flash eye caught me on the side of my head and opened up the side of my head. And that's when I said, we're not moving anywhere. So all 6 of us, we camped that night on this ledge. And then it was quite horrific the next morning to see how far where we'd come down that night. And then we had to navigate ourselves into the valley. And our mission was to basically patrol. We were given coordinates which we had to patrol. And we were always on the border with Mozambique. And it was this no-go area. And our orders were, if there's any kind of sighting we had to shoot at, we were given permission to shoot on sight. But the one day we'd been chopping and hacking our way through thick bush. I mean, the bush at Hondi is incredible. It's beautiful out there, amazing scenery, but it's hard bush to try and to get through. But we happened to get into some open ground, and we were below the brow of a hill. And I happened to look up, and on the hill brow, I saw about 6 to 8 CTs running up along the brow of the hill. I think they were trying to get back into Mozambique. And I immediately brought this to the attention of the sergeant, and he did nothing. What he did instead was to tell the radio operator to try and get comms with HQ and get permission to fire. Needless to say, these guys were long gone. But anyway, my radio operator climbed up the tree, managed to get comms. We got shut on by the commanding officer. That was the end of that. The guys were gone, and we carried on with our patrol. We may not have been able to engage these guys properly because they were quite a long way away, but we could have at least had a go at them. But we didn't have a chance because this guy insisted on getting radio comms with HQ. Anyway, we spent the full patrol, walking around, going from one abandoned village to another. There was nothing much going on with this guy. He never did any guard duty. We always had to do the guard duty at night. And on the last night, we came across an abandoned village, and it looked like there'd been some activity there. So I said, what we should do is set camp up here, have our meal, and then break camp after dark and set up an ambush position on a higher point looking down onto the village in case anybody came into the village that night. So we set up our ambush position, looking down on this village. and it started to rain cats and dogs, and we were soaked through the skin. It was very, very uncomfortable. We had no bivvies, nothing. We were just lying there, in the rain, looking onto this village. Then this guy, our sergeant, our stick commander, said, "No, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go and sleep in one of the huts down in the village." And I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "This is dangerous. You can't go there. We're not going to." And all the other guys in our stick, we said, "We're not going anywhere. We're staying right here." So this guy, he goes off. He goes into one of the huts, and that's it. We carried on. We stayed there in the rain, until eventually there was a break in the rain. And I said to the radio operator, good friend of mine, I said, "Let's go down and check on this guy." And so the two MAG gunners, they stayed, and they kept an eye out to make sure nothing came into the village. So we went down, we found this hut, we opened it up, and there was this guy fast asleep on the floor, snoring away. The funny thing was that as our torches sort of surveyed him and looked around him, he was covered in rats, live rats. Were running all over this guy. So we left him there. We went back into ambush position, stayed there the night, and then the next morning we went to go and get this guy. His face was bloated from, we think it was from flea bites. He could hardly see through his eyes. This guy had been eaten alive by fleas, we think, because he was sleeping in a grain store, not in a hut. Anyway, we did water patrol that morning, and we were ready to meet our RV that day, or go to our RV that day. And we had about 10 kilometers to cover to get to the RV point. And blow me, my felly had a blowout, and I lost the sole of my felly. And for the last couple of kilometers, I had to literally walk with my feet sticking out from the bottom of my shoe, and I got these awful blisters. And we got to the RV point, and our loot, I think his name was Colin Miller. I don't know if you ever came across him. He did our kit check, kit inspection. And so we went through everything, and we were missing a pair of binoculars. You know those green rubber binoculars with the blue kind of lenses?
Mm.
And it was this guy, our sergeant, had these binoculars early in the morning and tried to blame the radio operator for losing them. Anyway, Lieutenant Miller said, "Right, off you go. Back to that village. Look for the binoculars." Because if I remember correctly, he said to me those things cost like about 2,000 Rhodesian dollars. They were a very expensive piece of kit, and they were rare. So I managed to dig out my lightweight army boots, put those on instead of my blown out fellies. And we had to walk all the way back. And these binoculars were sitting on a rock outside the abandoned village. We grabbed them and went back. So that was a very long and angry walk, I tell you, Tony. But that just gives you an idea of some things don't always work out right when you do these kind of operations. And you do get people that, sometimes in charge that don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. I think to balance that, we had some excellent foreign soldiers in the army, but you also get the clowns that slip through. I won't mention any names, but an American captain who wore 2 silver revolvers on his hips like Patton did. He was in charge of me for a month at Vick Falls, and what a clown. We were on a patrol for 3 weeks, and we came back into Vick Falls looking forward to a day off or something and a few beers in the evening. And we'd barely got off the trucks, and he said, "Load up for another 2 weeks, you're going straight back out again." And in front of my men, I said, "No, I'm not doing that." Because you start to get itchy for a bit of civilian life, and then your mind's not on what you're doing.
Yeah.
You need, even if you're not, fighting war, it's stressful. You're doing ambushes, you're doing patrols, you don't know what's going to happen. So I said, "No, my guys need a break." And he mumbled and farted around, and eventually got the break. But he did a lot of other things that were just stupid, and the American accent really annoyed me. But by and large,
this guy on this patrol was a British artillery sergeant.
Right.
As I say, I won't mention his name either. No. But I mean, I just don't understand when all of us had been through the rest of us had been through full Llewellyn training. So we weren't Makunya soldiers, and we hadn't had a lot of bush contacts, and we were very inexperienced. But we did have that Llewellyn training, which was invaluable, and they should have put that to good use.
That was an error from senior management for letting him go out in the bush without that training. It was just
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
basically sending a child out. That's the equivalent, really.
yeah. And what a place Vic Falls was for fun and games. Hey, Tony.
Well, it was marvelous. I was reasonably easy on the eye in my youth, and everybody from sergeant below sergeant weren't allowed to go into the casinos. So all the very good-looking corporals and lance corporals had to go to the pub next door, and we were in there in the casinos loading it up, and yeah, it was wonderful. That's
Do,
all I
do
can
you do
say.
you remember that we had an OP at the Summit Bar at the Macassar Sun Hotel,
Absolutely,
and we also had an OP at the burnt down Elephant Hills Safari Hotel.
absolutely.
We had some amazing parties there with the Rhodesia hostesses, croupiers,
Ah,
and had some real fun times. And then,
yeah,
and when we used to get a night pass, we used to actually sleep on the hotel roof in the Summit Bar.
yeah.
It was amazing. It was such good fun.
That brings back amazing memories because when the village was being heavily stonked from the Zambian side, I went up onto the Summit Bar, being an ex-national serviceman who'd spent nearly 2 years in the area, to see if I could help the forward fire controllers from artillery and mortars and all. And I was a croupier in a casino at that point, rightly. And I had my dicky bow tie on, and I walked out there looking like James Bond with this bandoliers of ammo and a rifle in my hand to see if I could offer any assistance. And the guy looking at the map looked up at me, and he mouthed the words "piss off," and that's all I got out of him. And
Do
so,
you remember the big telescopes we had there on the Summit Bar? You could see the Zambian army camp very, very well from that Summit Bar. You could
yes,
yeah, you could see all the activity there.
when I had my mortar platoon, which was up at the ruins of the Elephant Hills, just behind it, we I often stayed up on the Summit Bar. I made a little bivvy out of my tent, and I stayed up there. I used to watch the spray from the falls going up into the starlit night, and
Yes.
we used to sit there looking at the Zambian side and making notes. So the guy who took over from us can look at the notes, and if we saw convoys coming to the bridge, we had to report it and all that type of stuff. But it's fascinating, lovely, lovely, lovely place to be based.
Yeah. We on the one TA camp that I did on my 21st birthday, I got a night pass. And my mates and I went to the Victoria Falls Hotel, and the manager, because the occupancy was so low, he gave us the honeymoon suite to sleep in that night. And needless to say, young men, we got rat-assed in the hotel, and we ended up skinny dipping in the Victoria Falls swimming pool, and then running in the nick across the lawns as a challenge.
Yeah.
And I just think the things that we got up to, as young men in the army, was we had lots of good fun, as well as challenging experiences.
Yeah, the hotel there, the Vick Falls Hotel, that beautiful, big, lovely old colonial one. The the army was charged $10 a night if you wanted to stay in there.
Yeah.
I got a little bit of a reputation because I'd walk up to reception with a girl on my arm, and the guy would just say $10, please. I got to know I got to know the flat rate. But what a wonderful place! It's probably the fondest memories I ever had because when I was in the casino, we would work all night and then go and lie by a swimming pool all day, and
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I've done
I remember the one camp that I did where the gun position was just off the Vic Falls airport. That particular camp, Kevin Curran, the international cricketer, was in artillery and joined us on that camp, and we used to play bush cricket during our spare time. But the thing that springs to mind there was we had our bunkers were dug out of the sand. We were effectively under the ground, and then we built sandbags around these bunkers, and then we had bivvy tents over these bunkers. But boy, did we get eaten alive by sand fleas. We got absolutely eaten alive by sand fleas on that trip. It's amazing.
terrible. You'd think they'd put some type of chemical in there to kill them off or something.
Yeah. You know those little cans that we used to get with the ointment on? The little
Yes.
screw-off cans. That stuff never worked. Even with the mosquitoes, it didn't really work for me
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
It still got bitten, eaten alive.
Well, we used to get that mosquito repellent that was made from oranges. What was it called? Orange peel. Citronella, something like that.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I know that you put that stuff on and the mozzies stay away, but then the elephants are sniffing your face in the middle of the night because they love oranges. And I had that happen to me once. Yeah.
Yeah, talking about elephants, and another camp that we did in Kariba, we had to go from Kariba along the Makuti Road, and then we cut a camp just off the road, and we only stayed there for one night, and I'm not sure why we were there. I suppose we were looking after Kariba town or something, or maybe there was some sightings in the area. I'm not too sure. Maybe the SAS were in the area and we were there to provide cover support. But anyway, we cut this very temporary gun position. And I was in my bivvy, sleeping in my sleeping bag, and I got stung by this massive scorpion right on my stomach.
Mm.
And I was just trying to get over this stuff. And we used to have camp medics in those days, and he put something on it, but it was still extremely painful. But just then, we all had to jump onto our trucks, onto our gun tractors, because a herd of elephants came right through the camp. It was amazing to see, and these guys are right next to us. It was a brilliant sighting. And then after that, we went back to our permanent gun position in Kariba, which was on the highest point outside Kariba town called Micah Point. I don't know if you remember the place. And we had a gun position up top there, and we had at that time we had two national service 156 lieutenants in charge of that gun position. It was Lieutenant Wayne Ingram and Lieutenant Dean Wooler. They looked after that gun position, and I wasn't there very long, but I do remember getting a night off in Kariba Bay, and that was brilliant. And that was a very short trip to Kariba.
Was that gun position right at the very, very, very top there at the you go at the village and then the winding road? Yeah.
Yes, right up at the top there. Exactly right. Yeah.
After the war, my brother, who's a civil engineer, he erected all of the microwave beacons from Salisbury or Harare, as it was then, all the way up to Kariba, and he put up the tower on that very top position there. Magnificent view.
Yes, it is. Yeah. That was a nice thing about these permanent artillery gun positions. They were always in the highest points. So we always had the best views, and in the hot places, except for Villa Salazar, as you know, was very flat. But in the other places, we were on high ground, and we always used to get fresh breezes during the summer. But Villa Salazar was awful. I mean, it was like 40 degrees Celsius temperature there. The whole time that we were there, it was incredibly hot. To allude to another trip, I did another trip to, this was Eastern Highlands, to a place called Penalonga. We set up our gun position on a cricket club oval in the Mbiza Valley near the village of Penalonga, when it's right flush right up against the Eastern Highland Mountains. And that was my first Christmas in 1977 I spent on that gun position. And it rained and rained and rained. And our bunkers, well, I know my bunker had about an inch thick of mud in it the whole time that we were there on that camp. And we were miserable, that we had to spend Christmas and New Year there. But what lightened up our lives a little bit was we had an excellent chef who cooked us a fantastic Christmas dinner in the cricket club, on the cricket club oval. So we were entertained with a fantastic meal, and I think the beers were free, and it was a great experience. And then on my birthday, my 19th birthday, may I say, they made me run around that cricket pitch naked while everybody threw sods of wet toilet paper at me. So that was another experience. But I've got a couple of interesting stories if you've got some more time.
Yeah, go for it,
Tony, about that Penalonga trip. The one was we were on a night pass, my friends and I, and we'd taken a 4-5 down to the Wise Al Motel in Tali. Needless to say, we got pissed. And then on the way back to camp, our driver lost his way. And we ended up on a back road on the outskirts of Umtali. And my mates and I were on the back of this 4.5. We were singing Winding My Way Down Baker Street. And the driver was traveling too fast. Suddenly there were no streetlights. And he inadvertently drove up someone's driveway. And he realized his error, slammed on brakes, on anchors. And all of us in the back of the 4.5, we were tossed around, the back of this 4.5. And the passenger in the front didn't have a seatbelt on. And he literally went through the front windscreen, which popped out. It didn't break. It just popped out. And he landed on the bonnet of the 4.5. And there we are, all groaning and moaning because we maybe cracked a couple of ribs. And the house owner and his wife came out, and they were standing outside their front door with dressing gowns on, looking at us in utter shock. So that was an interesting story. And then the other one was on like a full moon lit night. I was on guard patrolling around the perimeter of our gun position, and our troop sergeant had just returned from a night out in Umtali. He decided to go for a crap on the thunderbox. And the water table was very high. Literally, it was only like a couple of feet below the thunderbox. I mean, you could see the maggots squirming around, about 2 feet below. And this sergeant had a very uncomfortable experience. I could see his silhouette through the Hessian cloth that had been, put up around the thunderbox. And it was positioned in a sort of small forest of gum trees. And then I heard this loud crack. And his weight must have broken the frail, damp wooden flooring around the thunderbox. And he ended up in the squirming maggots. And there was much effing this and effing that going on. So I just beat a hastily retreat. I just got out of there. But the next day, the whole camp knew about it, obviously, because I'd spread this story around. And we had to then dig a new shit pit and move the thunderbox away. But that was absolutely hilarious.
I love destroying those thunderboxes, put 5 liters of petrol in there and then chuck a match down and watch them burn.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember the smell of that lime was awful.
All these familiar stories and memories come back. Hey? It's just part of our lifelong memory system, really. It'll never go, but we need to be reminded of them sometimes, like in this talk.
Yeah, so I've tried to give it a little bit more flavor, and I hope that your audience will appreciate it. I've tried not to dig too much into the military confrontation stuff, because I know there's so many stories more impressive than I could ever have given. And just to say my respect to all those brave soldiers that were out there on the front lines, protecting the people and the nation. And my salute to all of those individuals, whether they're gone now or still alive.
Amen. That's the object of this whole exercise, is to record our history and bring remembrance to them as well. A lot of guys are gone now. We're all getting old. I'm about to celebrate my big 7-0. And crumbs, it just time flies, doesn't it? I remember asking my brother what it felt like turning 10, because I was 8 and he was 10, and he said, "Oh, it's not bad," It was like 60 years ago.
I mean, it's hard to believe that it was so long ago. I mean, we're talking about over 45 years ago, aren't we now?
Yeah, it's incredible.
So I apologize in advance if my memories failed me in any of these recollections, but I tried to dig everything out as accurately as I possibly can. Tony, could I talk a bit about my novel?
Yes, I just want to say it's been an excellent talk, so don't undervalue what you've done. But yeah,
Thanks,
tell us something about it.
Yes, so for years and years, I've been doing a lot of research. I've got a lot of Rhodesian historical novels, and then during the COVID period, I decided to write a novel. It took me a whole year, And the story it's situated mainly in the Matoba Hills, and it's about a young colored boy that went to boarding school and was ostracized and bullied. And it was during those years in the late 70s where there was some integration that was happening, where coloreds and blacks were starting to be introduced to, certainly to the private schools anyway. And his story at the boarding school is much like the experiences that I had at boarding school in the 70s. And this school was way out in the bush in Balabala, south of Bulawayo. We were all Zambian kids. Our parents were expats that were on contract in Zambia, so most of us were Zambian kids. But anyway, this protagonist in the story, he gets fed up with life because of all the bullying and ostracizing, and he happens to go climbing up a kopje and ends up in an old bushman's cave and goes for a swim in a pool similar to, if you can imagine what Sonoya Caves pools look like, similar to that. And he gets sucked back in time to the days of Umzilikazi. And he meets this high oracle, this witch that trains him to become a Wyllie priest. And the story is it's basically an alternate history novel where this guy is there to try and change Rhodesia Zimbabwean history by influencing the last two Ndebele kings of Zimbabwe, being Mzilikazi and Ndebele, and this high oracle trains him up to be a priest and to help him to influence these two kings to make different decisions. So the story, he meets up with Robert Moffat, Cecil John Rhodes, has verbal altercations with both of them, but the story ends up with a massive battle at Malimi Dam in the Matoba Hills, where in this case, in this alternate history novel, the Ndebele triumph over the imperial forces of Cecil John Rhodes. And then the end of the story is he goes back to what I call now time in the novel, and he experiences the utopian change of a country, of a beautiful country, where it could have ended up without having over 40 years of Mugabe dictatorships. So that's the story. And it's on Amazon. You just have to search by going on to books, looking for my name. But the title of the book is Umtwakazi, Conquerors, Kings, and Colonists. So if you're interested, it's on Amazon, and it was self-published by myself a couple of years ago.
Have you got a copy there for us to look at the cover?
Yeah, there's the cover.
Raise it up. Bring it slightly closer to your camera, and raise it up some more. Raise it up. Raise it up. Yep. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, excellent. Very interesting.
Okay.
And how's it been doing?
It's okay. I knew it would have a sort of very long sales cycle. It was more of a work of love and passion rather than a commercial venture.
Yeah.
I spent quite a lot of money with professional editors and publishers. There's probably a few things in there that I would like to change, so maybe a second edition will come out eventually. But it was done, edited professionally, and there's a couple of maps in there to give people some orientation of where it was and when it was, and who the protagonists and antagonists were. And there's quite a lot of historical layering into the novel as well. So there's some historically factual stuff like places and people and events and that sort of thing. So any sort of person that's interested in Rhodesian history or characters of Rhodesian history, then might find it entertaining. It's all fiction, so it may be a good read on a cold winter's night.
I'm trying to nurture internal affairs guy, district commissioner, that has the most incredible knowledge and history of witchcraft and all that sort of stuff amongst the Shona people. But he's had an operation on his eyes and he's not ready to talk yet. But I'm really looking forward to that, because that type of thing is fascinating, and might have had a bearing on the war if we'd managed to latch onto those guys.
Yeah, well, in the novel, one of the things that I highlight and emphasize is the fact that we should have been fluent in all languages, all the main vernacular languages.
Yeah.
What a lot of people don't realize, and this came out of my research, and I've read books that were written by African authors, by Kalangas, by Ndevelis, and I learned a lot about the migrations of the Bantu people that came down from the northeast into Zimbabwe, and they were predominantly Kalanga people. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the Shona is a terminology that was a colonialist term given to a group of tribes, of Bantu tribes that spoke, a grouping of so-called Shona dialects.
Mm.
But originally they were Kalanga, the migratory tribes of Kalanga, and they went all the way down through Zimbabwe, over the Limpopo, and built Mupungubwe, which was their first settlement, and where they did lots of trading with ivory, gold, beads, all skins, you name it. It was a massive trading center, and then it collapsed, either due to overpopulation or environment. And this sort of nation of 12 tribes, now they'd sort of mixed with the Vendors and some of the other tribes, the Sutu tribes down there, and they moved back into Zimbabwe, and they apparently built Zimbabwe ruins. And so what happened at some stage was that, well, around about, I think it was about the middle of the 14th century, they split up into two branches. One branch went north and the other branch went east and set up the Batu state in Kami. And the ones that went up north started I think it was the Monomatapa dynasty. And that's how you got the breakup of the Kalanga. And then the Kalanga that went north, they became the Shona people eventually, because more tribes started to migrate down from the north, and they mixed with those earlier tribes, and they became the Zezerus, the Zazoris and the Daos and various other Manikas that lived up there in that side of the country. And the Kalangas are still the Kalangas, and they still live down there in the southwest of Zimbabwe, near the Botswana border, and they were pigeonholed as sort of a subset of the Ndebele, but they weren't. They were a separate tribe with a separate language and a separate culture. And even the Ndebele tribe themselves were a mixture of Nguni, Sutu, Vendors, and Kalanga when they crossed the border. So there's a whole lot to how that whole thing came about. And then, of course, you had the Abattoir people, the San people, who were the original inhabitants of Zimbabwe, and they got kicked out into the Kalahari Desert. And the book alludes to that. It mentions the fact that these Bushmen were there before anybody else, thousands of years before the Bantu migrations.
Yeah, I believe in closing on this subject, I believe the Bantu southern movement was only like about 200 years before the white man arrived in Africa. It wasn't like centuries and centuries before. It was a close shave to see who got the land first, really.
Yeah, so all these arguments and debates about whose land it was and the land question and all that kind of thing, you've got to challenge it, because I think this utopian finale in the novel kind of tries to bring that whole thing together, and it's a kind of what if scenario. What happens if we had done things differently? What could that outcome have been?
Yeah.
And so I think every inhabitant over the years, over the centuries, had a role to play in the outcome of Zimbabwe and where it is today. It isn't just one tribe, one people. It wasn't just because every tribe, in essence, apart from the San, were colonists.
That's right.
The Kalanga came down. You had the Monomatapa dynasties. You had the Batua dynasties. Then you had the Ndebele come up from the south. They conquered everybody and they took over the country. And then the British imperialists arrived. So it's a real deep, complex history.
And without mapped boundaries, who owned what? I mean, really, it's just
exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
they say, oh, it belongs to Africa. It's African, not colonial. Well, that means a guy from Nigeria could come and claim Harare, but it's ridiculous. You have to have boundaries.
Yes.
But I think we'll have to draw this talk to a close now. It'll probably be displayed in 2 parts. In closing, I'd like to say thank you very much, Neville. It's been a very interesting talk. And yes, I think your decision not to focus too much on the actual battles was a wise one, because we have heard that before. And you brought in some very interesting other facets of information. So thank you on that. My pleasure. I'd like to make my usual appeal that please, if you served in the military, to come forward and have a chat. You know, as you watch these, you can see they're not horrific. It's a chat, and we need to keep the series going. It's going through ups and downs to find people. I think this talk will be presented in about 8 weeks' time, but in the meantime, John van Zyl would have gone to South Africa to get his passport renewed. He lives in the Philippines, as most of you know. They couldn't renew it in Manila because the South African embassy just gave him wrong information, and now he has to fly all the way to the Cape, which is a massive expense to him. So if any of you are supporting him through Patreon, maybe you could bump up the donation in hindsight, because he would have done all that by the time you see this. That would be wonderful. And please subscribe and like the channel. That will help us a lot with our algorithms. Neville, once again, thank you very much. And I really appreciate you coming to give your time and your history and experience. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony, and thank you for your time, and thank you for your deliberation and your efforts in keeping this all together. And thanks to John and Hannes as well. It's much appreciated. I've watched a lot of the YouTubes, and it brings back a lot of fond memories. And keep it going. Well done, and all the best to all of you.
Thank you. In conclusion, not many of you know that Hannes is actually in the process of making a Hollywood movie on the Rhodesian army with actual live battle scenes and actors. It's going to be very interesting. So look forward to that. Okay. Excellent. I think we'll end it on that note. Okay.
Thanks, Tony. All the best, mate.
Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Ciao.